Alara had never expected a work call to lead her into the quietest night of her life. She trudged through the marble halls of Julian Thorne's mansion, the heels of her shoes clicking softly against the polished floors, carrying a folder that felt suddenly heavier than its contents. The estate, normally alive with the hum of activity and the faint flicker of security lights, was almost entirely dark. Curtains drawn, hallways dim, and an unusual stillness that seemed to press against her chest. She hesitated at the grand double doors that led to his private quarters, sensing a tension she had never witnessed before. Julian, the man whose reputation for ruthlessness had been whispered through every corner of the corporate world, had never seemed anything but controlled, composed, and unreachable. And yet, tonight, the air around him held a peculiar weight. When she stepped inside, the faint scent of sandalwood and lingering cologne reached her, but it was the silence that made her pause. Every instinct screamed for her to turn around, leave the folder, and retreat back into the safe familiarity of her own apartment. Yet, something a mixture of curiosity, fear, and an odd sense of responsibility kept her moving forward. The flicker of light under the bathroom door drew her gaze. And there he was. Julian sat on the cool tile floor, knees drawn to his chest, his hands clutching a photo that trembled slightly as he held it. The sight of him, usually the embodiment of control and impervious authority, in such raw vulnerability, made Alara freeze in place. The photo showed Julian's late wife, Isabel, smiling gently at the camera, her hand resting on the rounded curve of her belly. A tiny, unborn life had been captured in the image, a memory that seemed suspended in time, forever frozen in a moment Julian could never reclaim. His usually sharp features were softened by grief, his eyes red and glossy, rimmed with fatigue and sorrow. The sound of a small, choked sigh escaped his lips, and for the first time, Alara saw the man behind the public mask, the man who had been silently carrying a grief too immense for words. Her heart ached at the scene. "Julian," she said softly, stepping closer, unsure if her voice would reach him, unsure if her presence was welcome. He didn't respond at first, eyes fixed on the photo as if willing the past to return. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the sound of her heels against the tile seemed intrusive, yet she couldn't leave him there alone. "Sir," she tried again, more insistently this time. Julian finally looked up, startled, his face a mixture of shame and surprise. "Alara, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough and uneven, breaking through the carefully constructed layers of professionalism he usually maintained. I was delivering the file," she said, her words faltering slightly, though the sight of him like this made her heart pound in a strange, protective rhythm. "But you're not alone in this. You don't have to be." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You shouldn't see this. I shouldn't let anyone see this. It's pathetic." "Not pathetic," she murmured, kneeling beside him without thinking, ignoring the pulse of fear that surged through her. "Human. You're allowed to grieve, Julian. And it's okay to not be okay." Her voice held a steady warmth, an anchor in the storm of his emotions. For a long moment, he said nothing. His grip on the photo loosened slightly as he let out a ragged breath. The shadows of the bathroom flickered under the dim light, painting his features in a way that was painfully real, far removed from the intimidating figure his employees and the world knew. The silence between them was thick, yet it felt almost protective, a fragile cocoon in which Julian's vulnerability could exist without judgment. "My wife, my Isabel," he finally said, the words barely audible. "Tonight, it should have been our anniversary. We were supposed to celebrate. I wasn't there. I promised her I would be, but I put work first. And she's gone. And so is the child." His hands shook, the photo slipping slightly from his fingers before he caught it again. "I wasn't there. I should have been there." Alara felt the weight of his confession settle deep within her. She reached out, lightly placing a hand over his, a gesture small in scale but immense in meaning. "Julian, it's not your fault," she said softly. "You loved her. You were human. Mistakes don't erase the love you had, or the memories you shared. Isabel, she knew that." He shook his head violently, tears spilling over the edges of his closed eyelids. "She deserved better. She deserved me to be there. And the baby, I should have protected them both. And now, I have nothing. Nothing but regret. Then let her memory live in the way you choose to move forward. Alara replied, her voice firm yet gentle. She wouldn't want you to spend every night alone on the bathroom floor, consumed by guilt. She would want you to live, to feel, to love again. Julian's chest heaved, the raw, ragged breaths mixing with silent sobs. For a moment, the room felt suspended in time, a fragile bridge between despair and hope. Alara stayed, speaking softly about small things, memories, moments, the mundane but tender aspects of life that reminded him there was more to the world than grief. Her presence was a quiet affirmation, a reminder that he didn't have to face the emptiness alone. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost its shape in the quiet of that mansion bathroom. Julian finally set the photo aside on the counter, resting his forehead against the cool tiles as he exhaled shakily. You shouldn't be here, he murmured again, though the anger in his voice had softened, replaced by an acknowledgement of her courage. I'm here, she said simply, offering a small smile that felt like sunlight piercing the darkness. And I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to face this alone, Julian. Not tonight. Not ever. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile bond of trust, a quiet recognition of human vulnerability. He reached out, hesitantly, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but one loaded with a weight that neither had expected to feel. And in that moment, Julian realized that his world, previously so defined by control and cold ambition, might still have room for warmth, for comfort, for human connection. Alara's presence became a lifeline. Not through words alone, but through the simple act of staying, of refusing to turn away. In the shadowed corners of his grief, Julian felt something stir, something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly, but the faintest glimmer of relief that perhaps he didn't have to carry this weight entirely by himself. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe. The mansion, silent and dark, seemed less imposing with her there. She made it safe, made the sorrow tolerable. And in that space, unplanned and raw, a connection was born, a fragile, tentative thread that might, in time, become something more enduring. The next morning, Julian's office seemed impossibly bright. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on the sleek surfaces and casting elongated patterns across the room. Alara stepped in cautiously, holding her notes and a cup of coffee, aware that something unspoken had shifted between them since the night before. Julian was already seated behind his massive desk, his posture unusually relaxed, though there was a tension in his jaw that suggested the night's emotions were still near the surface. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the coffee down near him. He looked up, his usual sharp gaze softened by a vulnerability that she had never seen. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a depth that went beyond business and into something profoundly personal. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit," he said simply, the command gentle rather than authoritative. Alara settled into the chair, feeling the weight of anticipation. Julian Thorne, who normally controlled every word and movement in his domain, now seemed uncertain, almost tentative. The silence stretched for a moment before he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Alara, last night, you should not have seen me like that. I've spent years building walls around my emotions. I thought I could manage everything, protect everyone, and yet, his voice cracked slightly, betraying the hold he had over his feelings. I failed at the one thing that mattered most. I know," she said quietly, her tone steady and compassionate. "And you didn't fail her, Julian. You loved her. That's never something you can fail at." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity meant to convey both understanding and reassurance. "Guilt is a heavy burden, but you can choose how long you carry it, and how you let it shape your life from this moment onward." Julian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Every memory, every day since Isabel and the baby, I've been trapped in a loop. Work, meetings, decisions, all of it a distraction from the reality I couldn't face. I thought being ruthless, being focused, would protect me from the grief. Instead, it only magnified it. I've shut down, Alara. I've shut myself off from the world." "Maybe that's why you needed to see me last night," she suggested, her voice gentle. Sometimes, it takes an outside presence to remind us that feeling isn't weakness. It's what makes us human. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not with me here. Her words lingered in the room like a delicate thread, fragile yet undeniable. He leaned back in his chair, eyes focused on some distant point beyond the glass walls, as if seeing into a space that only he could inhabit. I don't know how to start again, he admitted, almost whispering. I've been numb for so long that the idea of opening myself, of trusting someone, scares me. You don't start by trusting someone else immediately, Alara said softly. You start by trusting yourself to feel, to allow yourself to grieve, to cry, to remember, and eventually, to forgive. Not them, not even the circumstances, but yourself. And when you're ready, you'll let the people who care for you in. Julian's gaze returned to her, and there was a flicker of something she hadn't seen before, vulnerability mixed with the beginnings of hope. I never thought anyone could understand this, or want to. My life has always been defined by control, efficiency, appearances. People like me don't feel in the way you're suggesting. You're wrong, she said firmly. You do feel. You felt it all along. You've just buried it so deep that no one could reach it, until now. And maybe that's exactly why it had to be me who saw it first. Sometimes, it takes an unexpected witness to remind us of what we've forgotten about ourselves. He remained silent, letting her words sink in. Finally, he reached for a document on his desk, but it wasn't the file she had brought. Instead, it was a framed photograph of Isabel and the baby, the same one from the bathroom. He held it reverently, tracing the contours with his fingers. I thought about this photo last night for hours, he confessed. All the memories, all the what-ifs. I've been punishing myself for choosing work over life. Over love. You loved her, Alara reminded him softly. And the life you built, the work you dedicated yourself to, doesn't erase that love. It's part of your story, but it doesn't define the entirety of it. You can honor her memory by living fully, not by remaining frozen in guilt. Julian's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he set the photo down with a deliberate care, as though acknowledging that while the memories were precious, they no longer had to imprison him. I've been so afraid of feeling, afraid of being hurt, afraid of failing again, that I've avoided everything that mattered. And yet, sitting here, talking to you, I realize I've been isolating myself from the very thing that could help me heal. You're not alone anymore, she said, placing a hand over his briefly, a gesture both comforting and grounding. You don't have to be. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like this, honest, open, and unguarded. You've already taken the first step by acknowledging your grief instead of hiding from it. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. I never thought I could feel this way again after all these years. I've convinced myself that numbness was the only safe place. But you've reminded me that feeling can be strength, not weakness. And it terrifies me and excites me, all at once. Alara offered a small, reassuring smile. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel excited. That's the first sign that your heart is waking up again. And you don't have to face it alone. I'll be here, alongside you, however long it takes. Julian leaned back, eyes soft and thoughtful, the weight of his burden slightly lifted by her unwavering presence. You've done something I didn't think anyone could do, he admitted quietly. You've awakened a part of me I thought had died, a part that can feel, can trust, can love again. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank me, she said simply. You just need to allow yourself to be human. That's the gift you give yourself. For the first time in years, Julian smiled tentatively, fragile, yet genuine. It wasn't a smile of control or authority, but of someone beginning to reclaim his humanity. And Alara, witnessing this quiet transformation, understood that the path ahead would be long, filled with moments of doubt and waves of sorrow, but also with opportunities for joy, connection, and love. As the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the office, Julian finally let go of the rigid composure he had maintained for years. He allowed himself to exhale fully, to acknowledge that grief could coexist with the possibility of new beginnings. And in that shared moment of vulnerability and understanding, a foundation was laid not just for healing, but for something that could grow into a profound, authentic connection. The cemetery was quiet that morning, sunlight filtering through the branches of tall oaks, casting dappled shadows across the freshly turned earth. Julian stood in front of the twin headstones of Isabel and their unborn child, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his wedding ring and placed it on the grass beside the markers. Alara watched from a respectful distance, feeling the weight of the moment and the significance of what Julian was about to do. The air was heavy with both sorrow and a tentative sense of closure. He knelt slowly, brushing a hand over the engraved names, and whispered softly, "I will always love you, always. But it's time to live again. It's time to honor your memory by not letting grief consume me." His voice broke, yet there was determination beneath the tremor, a promise not only to Isabel, but to himself that he would no longer be imprisoned by guilt. Alara stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently. "You've carried so much on your own for too long. Let the love around you, the people who care for you, help you heal. You've taken the first step by acknowledging the pain. Now it's time to let it go and make space for the life you deserve." Julian took a deep breath, looking up at her. For the first time in years, his eyes were clear, reflective, and alive. "Alara, I've carried this guilt like a weight I could never shed. And now, I realize that holding on to it isn't honoring them. It's dishonoring myself. It's been a selfish grief, in a way." He paused, letting the words settle between them. "But you've shown me that I can still feel, still care, still connect. And that scares me. But it's the kind of fear I think I can embrace." Alara's smile was warm and steady. "That's called growth," she said softly. "It's okay to feel fear alongside hope. It's okay to step forward even when the past tries to anchor you. And you don't have to do it alone. You have people willing to walk beside you." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the serene landscape of the cemetery. The quiet rustle of leaves seemed almost like a gentle applause, acknowledging the courage it took to confront years of grief and remorse. Julian reached out, taking Alara's hand in his, a gesture of trust and newfound vulnerability. "There's something I need to admit," he said, his voice steady but earnest. "I've realized that I feel more than gratitude for your presence. I feel connected to you. I feel something I haven't felt in years. And it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't want to ignore it anymore." Alara's heart fluttered, a mixture of relief, warmth, and cautious excitement. She had sensed the bond growing between them, had seen the walls around his heart begin to crumble, but hearing him articulate it so openly made the emotion tangible. I feel the same way, Julian," she admitted, her voice steady despite the rush of emotion. "I've felt it growing, quietly, through every moment we've shared. And I think, maybe it's time we acknowledge it fully." Julian smiled, a mix of relief and joy that softened his usually austere features. "Then let's take that step, together. Not as employer and assistant, not as a fleeting connection born of grief, but as two people who've recognized something real in each other. I want a real dinner, Alara. No work talk, no files, just us." Her laughter, light and genuine, broke through the lingering heaviness of the morning. "I'd like that," she said simply, the promise in her words clear and heartfelt. "We'll take it one step at a time, and I'll be there." As they walked away from the graves, Julian carrying the symbolic weight of the past now lifted from his shoulders, there was a sense of renewal in his steps, a quiet confidence that came from finally allowing himself to feel, to grieve, and to hope again. The mansion, the office, the world beyond were no longer just places of duty and responsibility. They had become landscapes where he could integrate his sorrow with the possibility of love and happiness. The staff noticed the subtle changes immediately. Julian's demeanor at the office was softer, more approachable, yet still commanding. He laughed more freely, acknowledged accomplishments with genuine warmth, and took brief moments to connect with those around him. Even small gestures, a nod of appreciation, a smile, a thoughtful question spoke volumes about the transformation within him. And while the world may have continued at its usual frantic pace, for Julian and Alara, there was now space to breathe, to nurture a connection that had been forged in the crucible of shared grief and understanding. Evenings at the mansion changed as well. What had once been a place of solitary routine became infused with quiet laughter and conversation. Julian began to cook occasionally, small meals that were more about connection than perfection. Alara joined him, teasing him gently about burnt edges or over-seasoned sauces, and he responded with good-natured grumbles, their banter lightening the shadows that had once dominated his home. There were moments of reflection, of reminiscing about Isabel and the unborn child, shared with tenderness rather than overwhelming sorrow. And in those moments, Julian's heart began to expand once more, making room for both remembrance and renewal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and aro, try of light and shadow, seemed to mirror their journey, grief tempered by hope, pain softened by connection, past and future coexisting in delicate balance. Julian turned to her, his hand finding hers effortlessly. "Thank you," he said, voice low and full of sincerity, "for seeing me when I thought no one could, for staying when I would have pushed anyone away, and for helping me remember what it means to feel alive again." Alara squeezed his hand gently. "You didn't need reminding, Julian. You just needed permission to grieve, to hope, to love. And I'll keep walking with you, for as long as you want me to." He smiled, a smile that carried the weight of the past, but also the lightness of possibility. "I think we're ready," he said softly. "Ready to step into the future, to honor what we've lost, and embrace what's ahead. Together." And as they stood there, hand in hand, the world around them continued. But for Julian and Alara, a new chapter had begun, one built on honesty, shared grief, emotional courage, and a love that was both tender and unshakable. The mansion, the city, and the life ahead seemed brighter now, not because the pain had vanished, but because they had chosen to face it together, opening themselves to joy and connection after years of isolation. The promise of tomorrow was theirs to shape. And in that promise, Julian found not only freedom from guilt, but the hope of lasting love, the kind that grows from understanding, patience, and the courage to start over, no matter how heavy the past may have been. Moral lesson: grief and loss are heavy burdens, but they do not define the entirety of life. True healing begins when we allow ourselves to feel, to forgive, and to accept support from those who care. Love can emerge from the depths of sorrow, showing that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Courage lies in acknowledging pain while still opening one's heart to hope and new beginnings. Life offers second chances, and embracing them can transform despair into connection, guilt into compassion, and fear into joy. Trust, empathy, and shared understanding can create a future brighter than the shadows of the past. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with friends, and comment your thoughts or lessons learned.